Tenacious D sketch. I don't know if you ever watched Tenacious D, like when Mr. Show was big, but they're like sitting there snapping their fingers into like into this like a little cassette recorder, and they find out that they weren't recorded. Like they were having this like hot
this
jam.
incredible jam and like incredible discussion. And they find out that it's nothing. It's like, oh, how do we do this? You're right. So we should always record as soon as we come in. Things as soon as we come in. Right. So today on the show, we have to get through the rest of our
We've got a lot going on
spooky
today.
Season grab bag.
Right.
Right. We are going to talk about Let the Right One in conjunction or building on the conversation that happened Wednesday at the Fort Worth Film Club screening. Let the Right One In, which is Tomas Alfredson's 2008 Swedish vampire film. We are also going to have our segment called Recommended If You Like.
Correct.
Which I'm
excited about that.
We'll give some movie recommendations to listeners if they liked or if they like Let the Right One In. Right. But first, you want to talk a bit about Halloween Ends?
I do, because so coming off of Halloween Kills, which I actually went back and watched again, which I should not have. Halloween Kill. I mean, so like I said, we've mentioned off mic how interesting David Gordon Green's career has been, starting off with George Washington, the small little independent, come out of nowhere film, and then being kind of an indie darling, and then going into some pretty mainstream, stoner comedies, and then
stoner comedies, and then kind of to describe those,
and then pairing up with Jason Blum and Blumhouse to do this Halloween trilogy.
I'm also really interested in his TV stuff that he did with Danny McBride,
right? And that pairing with Danny McBride and his whole kind of taking a mean Napoleon Dynamite look to cinema, like the Foot Fist way, and like a lot of those comedies that were Observe and Report specifically, just kind of where they had that sort of innocent savant that was also like hyper violent and hyper realized. It was just kind of like an ugly, very funny, but kind of an ugly kind of comedy. So he's an interesting character. And so when they announced their trilogy, I think everyone was very excited because again, we've come into this era of prestige horror, right? You've got the A24 crew, you've got Jordan Peele doing his thing, and now you've got David Gordon Green, and a bona fide art house director, taking on one of probably if not the biggest horror franchise of all time. And to varying degrees of success, I think Halloween was pretty well received. I mean, and obviously it's a meditation on PTSD and how long-term trauma affects.
Which most horror is, to some extent, a meditation on trauma and grief.
Right. And then to fumble it so very poorly with Halloween Kills, which I like. So I went back after I watched Halloween Ends, and I was thinking, well, okay, maybe I missed something here. Maybe there was a message here that he was trying to convey. And I can't pick out, aside from mass hysteria and mass vigilantism, but it's wrapped in such heavy-handed, ridiculous dialogue and terrible, terrible acting. A lot of the side characters, it's really odd to see it in a big budget movie, but like the bartender who was clearly someone they picked off the street, or that just had nothing, that was reading lines, and then all the way to Anthony Michael Hall, and I don't know if anybody could have done anything with that dialogue. The evil ends tonight, or evil dies tonight, just chanted over and over again.
Do you feel like that was intentional with that film? Because I think that Kills takes such a tonal shift from Halloween. And so do you think that was an intentional turn then on Gordon Green and McBride, who's helping write this show? Do you think that and the bad acting, was that like a directorial choice?
If so, it's very bold and brave, and almost it is very difficult to navigate that fine line of wagging your finger at the audience, which I clearly think is what they're doing. Partly what they're doing in Ends, by sidelining Michael Myers and putting him basically in a hole the entire movie, making him ineffectual, making him not be able to really complete his kills and to a certain
showing
extent.
Him weak and vulnerable.
Right. It does a couple of things. It really is a finger wag to all of the quote unquote fanboys that they put these mass murderers up on a pedestal, right? We root for these guys at the end of the day. Yeah. And Mike Myers is a weird one to root for. I mean, yes, he's just an evil, like historically just an evil, mindless entity.
He's an analog for kind of all the unspeakable, unnameable evil that kind of exists in the shadows, right? That is unkillable.
Right. And if you look at the other big bads of the genre, Jason
Freddy.
Jason is a mindless killer, but also becomes such a parody by the end of those movies where he's just punishing preteen sex that it's just a joke, right?
Right.
Freddy was also jokey at the end of the day as well. So there was a little bit of an ease of like being able to champion those guys as people you'd want to see kill people, right? I mean, because again, the people they're trying to kill are silly caricatures of teenagers, what have you.
Yeah.
Mike Myers has always kind of been this presence who's killing innocents for no reason other than he's just evil, and so for the collective to have propped him up and and again, I don't necessarily know that's actually happening, aside from, yes, there's complaints about what kind of kills he has, or and you go into these movies wanting kills. I would say, going back to Halloween Kills, what's interesting again is the finger wag, and then additionally ramping up the violence in that movie, which is what are you trying to convey? It seems like you're trying to have your cake and eat it too. With Ends, I think that I don't necessarily know if they were successful in doing it, but I think they got back to their message of this generational trauma and how it affects the kids and it affects the communities. And you could argue in a take on Halloween Ends is that Michael Myers doesn't really exist in that movie. It is just Haddonfield is a town that's been beset by horror, and there's another kid who has been involved in an accident that was not really his fault, and has been bullied and finds refuge in this figure, this boogeyman, and it gives him power. Ultimately gives him power finally for the first time in his life. Yeah. I did not think it was 100% successful, but I think it really is a really interesting take to have this message to the viewer of, oh yeah, all that stuff that you were rooting for, you really shouldn't have been rooting for it, and here's why, and really here's the message that we were trying to say.
I agree, and I think that Halloween Ends and Halloween Kills are tonally of a piece. I think that Ends is more successful in how it pulls that tone off and how it pulls its message off. But both, I mean, if you watch those two back to back, they feel much more of a piece than those two do with the first one in this trilogy. I see Halloween Kills as trying to have this message of mob mentality. This is what happens when you whip people up into a fury, into a fervor, right? This is what happens when you try to kill the big bad. And then with Halloween Ends, it almost turns its attention to a question of nature versus nurture, which is a pretty boring question, but I think in a movie like this, it's interesting in that it's asking, was this kid Corey always like this? Was this always buried there? Or did this accident bring that out? And the community's refusal to give this kid
any sort of reprieve, right?
Any kind of reprieve, but any kind of like forgiveness, help, and love and care that he needed. And this in turn implicates all of that community in the same way that mob mentality did as well. And you're right, Michael Myers doesn't exist except for they've killed, quote unquote, one boogeyman, and they need another one. They have to find this big bad to hang on to.
Right. Because otherwise the big bad becomes them. They have to look internally, right?
Yeah. And even so, the father of the kid who Corey accidentally, kills while he's babysitting, wants to help him. He sees him walking on the street and he feels bad. He's like, maybe I can offer him some help. And then he sees the look in his eyes and he asks that question point blank. Was he always like this, or did we do this?
Right.
And again, implicating the viewer, implicating society as well. Haddonfield is a weird town. So apparently there's one bar that everybody goes to.
Yes. Yeah.
One diner that everybody goes to. And
like two cops
and a radio station with this big broadcast tower. I mean, it is a torch of a broadcast tower, flamethrower. And this DJ who, regardless of how sort of creepy and pervy he seems, kind of knows what he's doing.
He's very reminiscent of the of the DJ. I'm sure you haven't seen Eight-Legged Freaks, but he's very reminiscent of the DJ. Right. Well, and also like that is it seems like that's a throwback to Texas Chainsaw Massacre too.
Sure.
But to your point, the remaining of the community has not forgiven Laurie either. In fact, you see that throughout the film as well, where she's blamed for Michael Myers' rampage, essentially, and who's left in its wrath.
And this is something that really, Laurie becomes a villain, or becomes blamed for this, becomes blamed for, in a way, baiting Michael Myers, but somehow, and I think one of the characters even says, like, you turned on this guy and then you rejected him. But again, we know this trope. I mean, we know, and I think they subvert it, and I like it, right? But we know this trope of sort of like men taking revenge on women in a quote unquote justified way. A lot, you see this in sort of like, rape revenge movies. But this is like, well, you rejected this guy, and this is him coming for a quote unquote justified action.
Right.
But in this film, I think it's interesting too that the heroes are women. At the end of the day, the heroes are the women that everyone in a way blamed for this monster coming into town.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, and I think, I don't know if they were 100% successful, and clearly there's a lot of there's a lot of discourse going on right now, whether it's very much Last Jedi, where you were either on one side of the fence or the other side of the fence. But I do think that I wish Kills hadn't have been such a low point in the trilogy. I wish it had done whatever it was trying to do differently, so we would look at this, even if it was a middling series of Halloween films, fine. But at least they tried to do something different. They tried to do something interesting with it. And I don't think they did it by making just a ton of money and also just kind of subverting all kinds of expectations. It's like they almost did it under people's noses with that, and we kind of lapped it up, but then rebelled against it. I don't know. It's very interesting to me. I think it will be interesting to look at this a few years down the road when we were away from it a little bit, to see whether culture catches up to what they were actually trying to accomplish.
I think this last one is more interesting for the things that it almost does. So it almost doesn't bring Michael Myers into the movie at all. And I would have loved to have seen this movie where Michael Myers was just a name that was bandied about, right? That people talked about, and we never saw him. I also like that it is, do you know the movie that I really want to see now? I want to see David Gordon Green's version of Badlands. Mm-hmm. Right? I want to see Corey and Allison going off, leaving that town, and seeing all the shit that happens because of it.
Right.
I mean, that to me seems so, that would be so compelling. Because, there is this question of why don't we leave these traumatic places? Why haven't Allison and Laurie left this city? And Haddonfield, again, it feels like some kind of like strip mall town,
right?
Except for this blowtorch of a radio station, which I keep coming back to because it's kind of fascinating. But yeah, why do we stay in these places that have been the scene of so much trauma? What is the draw? Why can't we move on? Why can't we let go? But I think that's something that the movie's trying to get to.
Agreed.
And it would be more interesting, right, to see Allison and Corey, two people traumatized in this town, taking that experience outside of the town and sort of dealing with that in, violent ways.
I think the reason people don't leave is because they all work for the mental hospital there where Michael was stationed.
Oh, okay. And so we have to stay close to the trauma. The trauma pays us.
Exactly. It's our livelihood.
We make our living on trauma.
I almost wish that they had have just gone really hardcore with this and gone full on prestige horror, using Michael Myers as a baseline for all of the things that they were trying to say, rather than trying to again have a movie where, oh man, it's really cool when he stabs him through the eye or or rips his head off, or
when you hear the squish of his brain, like when he stomps on his
right, as opposed to what they did now. But yeah, I think, like I said, it'll be interesting to see how it all goes out.
Yeah. One thing about the ending, I thought it was kind of hokey, but I do think they had to come back to this idea of that collective fury, that collective mob mentality in Kills is resolved with a kind of collective destruction of Michael Myers and then a kind of communal healing. or perceived communal healing, because everybody is there to see.
And then we flash on the mask that's still on the table at the end of the movie, which again, I think again, and I don't think that's necessarily a setup for a sequel or anything like that. I think it's a nice thing where it lingers, right? It's one of these things that's always there.
Evil is always here,
right?
Yeah. So this evil is gone, but there's always this other evil.
So back to our movies. I think I was the last one to pick the movie, so we're back on our 5 spooky. We got 5 more spooky movies to talk about. I'm going to let you choose the next one we speak of.
Okay.
Pick well.
Oh, Cure.
Oh,
Cure.
All right.
I love this movie. I love this director. This movie has just entered into the Criterion Collection. If you're into those kind of things, I know some people aren't, but what the fuck ever. I think they're kind of awesome. Quick note on this director. Do you know this director at all? Or how much do you know? I'm sorry, Kiyoshi Kurosawa.
I am familiar with Pulse. I've seen. So I was really big into J-horror when it had its kind of reckoning. So
because Cure in a way started that. I mean, and it was. I'm not sure. Does it get categorized under J-horror, or does it sort of act as the influence or sort of precursor to things like The Ring and Grudge, the Japanese originals?
Ring comes so quickly after Curse.
98?
So 98. So Curse is 97, Ring is 98. Ring hits so hard that I don't think it doesn't fall into the same J-horror because you're not dealing with a ghostly entity necessarily. Right. You're also not dealing with a kind of a small child who's trying to torment her. Yeah. So I think a lot of the themes are there, but it doesn't. It never got an American remake. It never really surfaces once you have Ring, and you have the Ring, One Missed Call, Pulse, all these other ones that have sequels, and so I think it kind of gets left behind, even though it's the kind of the grandfather of them all.
He started off writing pink films or directing pink films, which was like Japanese softcore. I just find that fascinating. He just won the Silver Lion for directing it. Well, last year's Berlin festival for Wife of a Spy.
I haven't. Has that been made its way stateside yet?
It's on Mubi.
Okay.
I know we've discussed that you don't have Mubi.
I don't have Mubi.
I do have Mubi. Because I'm a jackass, and I'm like, well, that's $10. I don't care.
Right.
But it's like every month, and most of the time on Mubi, I just add things to the queue without fully watching.
Right.
But no, I have. Wife of a Spy just hit Mubi not too long ago.
So give us a breakdown of what Cure is about. Good luck.
Okay. So essentially,
this is the Japanese God told me to, by the way.
No, exactly. It really is. It's perfect in how it matches up with that. I have that in my notes. So there are a series of murders taking place in which the victims have all had an X carved into their throat. It's not necessarily the means of death, but it's often post-mortem that the X is carved into their throat. The killers are always found nearby. Maybe they're hiding, but they never tend to run. And they have no recollection of the murder and no real motive or reason. So a kind of world-weary detective, Takabe, who has a mentally ill wife at home, a wife at home who's struggling in some way.
Yes, never really explained.
And it's not, at least apparently, never not physical. But we do see her. She always comes in and starts the washer with nothing in it.
Right. It's almost like she has dementia.
Right. Except she's 35.
Right.
So Takabe's charged with investigating these murders, and let's see. Oh, right. So this has that kind of same connection to God Told Me To. Takabe with a psychologist partner, another cop named Sakuma, eventually figures out who's responsible. They're having all these conversations, but they eventually come across this guy whose name is Mamiya, and he has extreme short-term memory loss, and he's really fucking annoying about it, especially to Takabe. Takabe like loses his shit at one point and is going to just go after him. But he always asks people to tell him about themselves. And so even our detective, even Makabe. So it turns out that Mamiya was a student of psychology and of mesmerism and hypnosis. He doesn't have any real memory problems, right? He's just this master of hypnosis and of hypnotizing people and planting suggestions. in their minds, using repetitive sounds, asking the same question over and over. He uses his lighter a lot, right? Look at this lighter, right? Look at the flame. Sometimes water, right? Dripping of water. And that's how he gets people to kill whoever he wants, or to plant the suggestion of killing these people he wants. So
do you think that it's who he wants that he wants them to kill them? Or is it he's unlocking?
Okay. No, this is a good question, because it's never clear, right? I think, you want to know what I so
absolutely, yeah.
I think that what he's doing is letting people access those thoughts and impulses that they know they shouldn't do, but they still want to. So I don't necessarily think he's saying, oh, I want you to kill this person, as much as he is saying, yeah, act on these things that you're not supposed to act on, right? Act on these, because he says to the doctor, he's taken to the hospital, and a female doctor is treating him, and he says to this doctor, he asks her why she isn't a surgeon, and she kind of gives a vague answer about not being able to, I guess, operate on a cadaver. And he says something about, but don't you want to slice open a man? And then we see this woman in a public restroom cutting off the face, right, of a man. Yeah. So there is that kind of suggestion of, I want you to commit violence, but because this is also what you want to do, even though you're not supposed to act on these things.
Right. I think so. The way that I took all of this, and I want to dig into this, because there's and kudos to the explanation, because that was not easy to do.
No.
and if you go and watch this movie, it is not as straightforward as that. It's very back and forth. You're going to lose yourself in different characters. It jumps around, and it asks a lot of the viewer.
And we get these weird visions too. So at one point, Takabe takes his wife to a mental hospital, and they're on the bus, but this bus is like in the clouds, it's surrounded by smoke, which could imply a kind of dream, a kind of fantasy, or just a stylistic choice, but you don't know.
Right.
You also get like intersperses of Takabe seeing himself reach for a knife, with the implication being he's going to attack or harm his wife. He has visions of seeing his wife like having committed suicide. So, but they just kind of sit there, and there's no explanation offered. A lot of times they're never even returned to.
Right, yeah. Right. To me, what Mamori is wanting these, I think it ties into what the title of the movie, which is Cure, which is he is alleviating them of whatever is causing them, whatever they think is holding them back. And of course, it's taken to extremes, right? But all of them are acting out on some sort of trauma. And again, trauma may be too strong of a word, but something that is holding them back within their own lives. So when one cop kills the other cop, it's because he's been passed over for promotion. And I may be misremembering all of these details.
He also says, I just hated him.
Right, yes, I also
he's annoying. Right. He just says he's annoying. Right?
But Takabe clearly has had these feelings about his wife, and he feels obligated to take care of her. He clearly loves her, but he also understands that his life grossly would probably be easier were his wife not to be in it anymore. This ties into God Told Me To, because Takabe comes across the hypnotism portion of it almost on his own, out of nowhere. And like he starts to ask about hypnotism well before it's actually introduced, or even where he were to know Mamori was actually using the lighter in a sense.
And they're having this conversation. He and Sakuma, the psychologist, keep having this conversation about, why do criminals commit these acts? Why do people kill people? And the psychologist at one point is like, who knows?
Right.
Sometimes
they just
people just do. And he's like, yeah. And then he has that question. Do you think someone could have told them to do this?
Right. And so that it ties into the Ted LaBianca, where you're almost in God Told Me To, where he is clearly tied to this person in some way, and potentially is also like this person, or could be like this person given a different set of circumstances. But that's why he's drawn to these killings and is obsessed with them and can't get past trying to figure out why they're happening.
You even have the same kind of meet cute, right? In Cure that you do in God Told Me To, where Takabe goes to see Mamiya in his cell, and Mamiya says something like, "Oh, you're different," or like, "You're special," and makes these comments of like, "Okay, right," and he sees himself there, and then they become become.
And then Mamiya shows him his underarm vagina, and it all
connects. Cure is a sequel to God's
at least in spirit only.
And then, but by the end of it too, Takabe becomes just like Ted LoBianco's character, in that he almost takes the place of, or gets completely consumed by all of this in a way that, well, okay, I want to talk about the ending.
Yeah, sure.
Because the ending is really cool and really fucking ambiguous. So Takabe tracks Mamiya down so Mamiya gets arrested, Mamiya escapes. Takabe tracks Mamiya down. There's a lot of suspension of disbelief in this film. How did he get here? How did he get there? It doesn't matter.
Right.
So Takabe tracks him down and basically just murders Mamiya, just shoots him. And before Mamiya dies, he makes this X with his finger in front of Takabe. Takabe finds in Mamiya's sort of psycho barn this old phonograph recording of a voice that is meant to be sort of like hypnotic instructions. I think it's kind of
It's very Ring-esque, right? Where you find this old recording,
and there was that old videotape that Sakuma had found.
Right.
Who it was like the first person practicing Japanese mesmerism.
Right.
That's weird. They would be on VHS, but cool. Okay.
They were very advanced technologically.
But
speaking.
again, so Takabe just shoots Mamiya. Apparently, there's no repercussion for it, and then. The last scene of the film, after that, we see Takabe's wife in the mental institution, and she's been killed, and she has the X cut in her throat. We see Takabe at a diner, at a restaurant, having coffee, speaking on the phone, telling someone to bring the car around, which it seems like a new predicament.
Right.
And he speaks to the waitress, like pays his bill. She goes off. And the last thing we kind of see is her picking up a knife and walking towards someone as if to attack that person. And that's it, right?
Yeah.
And so this idea of like, what just happened? The last person she talked to was our guy Takabe. What's going on? What are we meant to sort of take away from that?
Yeah, this movie is so good.
I fucking love this movie.
It's one of those ones I would almost say you're going to love it the second and fourth time you watch it, where you've allowed yourself to live in this environment, live in this world for a while, and not have to really try to figure out everything, right? You're not trying to like look for the little nuances, because that last scene, the first time you see it, you're like, I was just like, okay, am I missing something in the corner of the frame? What's going on here? Like, oh shit, I know the movie's almost over because I can see the timer going, but I have no idea what's going on. And then by the time you've seen it over and over again, you just kind of let that wash over you and let the implications. Again, it is a infinitely better film than God Told Me To. Like the whole Ted LoBianco, why did you kill people? Why did you kill people? God Told Me To. It's so. But anyway, The Cure is so good, and it really is. I mean, like I said, it's such a. If you are a fan of those other films, this one is heads and shoulders above those. And not to denigrate any of those, I would say Pulse is really good.
I like Pulse a lot. Pulse is almost prescient in its kind of technological malaise that we've fallen into. Yeah. I think it's really cool. Yeah. These are my favorite types of quote unquote horror movies. I don't really, this is so atmospheric, so moody, so, oh God, artsy, right?
It really is.
And that is what I love about it. So many things are implied. There's not a lot of exposition. Stuff just sits there and it says to you like, go ahead, try to figure me out. Fine.
It kind of makes sense why this was never like targeted for an American remake, because you can't really you can't like elevate any of this to make it where it's in your face. No. Whereas you could The Ring, and I will say that Gore Verbinski did a really good job of Americanizing The Ring. I think that was
both of those movies.
Yeah, they were stellar.
Yeah.
I saw Ringu in a midnight screening at the Magnolia over in Dallas, and it was when the Asian Film Festival.
Asian Film Festival,
and dude, I was crawling out of my chair when she came out of the TV. That was
I watch it at home and I'm still just scared. I mean, I start looking behind doors and I turn lights on. I'm a grown ass man in his own home, scared. Yeah.
Did you read anything about how the Tokyo sarin attacks had affected their industry? And like,
no.
So there was a whole I might get the name wrong, but there was a whole set of sarin attacks in Tokyo underground in their subway systems in 1995 by this like religious cult, essentially.
Right. I remember that in the news.
And then a lot of these films kind of speak to that general, oh shit, why would someone do this, right? What was the motivation? This horrid attack on innocent people. Why would this happen? And a lot of people have written about how the sarin attacks kind of informed the pop culture, and a lot of the films that were made right afterwards were based on kind of that general feel of horror.
That makes a lot of sense, especially asking the question of like why, like what is the point of doing this, and then also further connects to God told me to.
Right, exactly. So God told me to influence the Tokyo sarin attacks, which then created Cure.
Influence Cure.
And honestly, I mean, it's good cinema. So
it's
can
great.
we point fingers?
Yeah, no, I love this. Pick something.
All right, we're going to pick something. And the next one, I love this movie. And the next movie is Time Crimes by Nacho Viglato.
Okay, so I didn't tell you this when you gave me the list, but I had seen this before. But I didn't want to say anything because I wanted to watch it again, because I have always been like, what the fuck? Like in the best way. In the best way. Because so take it away. Yeah, you're going to have to.
I have...
Can I just tell you my notes on this?
Yeah, please.
Here's my notes. Grandfather paradox. The scariest, most dangerous thing in the world is confronting yourself, seeing and experiencing the consequences of your own. I'm just like, but I don't know.
And so if we learn anything about me over the course of this podcast, I want it to be that I fucking love time loop movies, man. I love them so much. Like, I don't know if you can even have a bad one. There's
you're in.
So
Anytime there's like messing with time, you're just in.
So we are dropped in on this Spanish couple, and they are moving things within their house. Looks like they've just got a new house. They're doing some renovations.
Right.
And, they're just a typical Spanish couple. They have sex in the middle of the day. Look like they're retired, kind of like...
That's what siesta means.
Right. The way that I've come to understand it is that's what that means. But the man... his wife is going off to do some errands. The man is just sitting in his nice yard, and he picks up a set of binoculars and just to look out across the expanse of his estate. And most likely he's probably looking for animals.
It's the countryside.
Right. He's just enjoying the afternoon. And he sees this woman who is attractive and starting to undress,
topless,
and that's really about it, right? I mean, and at some point he gets distracted. He comes back and he sees through those lenses again that the woman is now laying down. She's now appears to be unconscious. So, being the good citizen that he is, he goes off and then sets upon this. He goes off to find the woman to make sure that she's okay, and he comes across this person who is in bandages.
Oh, he's stabbed first.
Oh, it was okay.
Because he goes he sees the woman who's now completely naked, unconscious, and he's like, "Whoa, are you okay?" And then
the person in the bandages stabs him in
scissors.
Right, and so he's starting to run away, and it just sets off this series of events where it all turns out that his estate is next to some sort of experimental science lab that is working on time travel or something to that extent. And one of the lower level lackeys at that science lab knows that he won't be around to see the time travel experiment. So he decides to do it on his own about a week before they're actually scheduled to do it. And he catches this poor man in a time loop. And so, while he's running away from the man with bandages who stabbed him, he runs upon the science lab. The science technician, who's the director of the film, by the way, has the man get into the time travel device and hide from the man in the bandages. Well, it turns out that the man in the bandages is actually himself. So he stabbed himself, and through a series of events, there's ends up being 3 to 4 to 5 of these guys.
And his name is Hector.
And his name is Hector. And so he refers to Hector number 1, Hector number 2, Hector number 3. So as the first 20 minutes of this movie, you think it's going to be a horror film because a lot of the elements of when he sees the man in bandages, show up. It is a very startling image, and he gets stabbed, and the girl has been, she's totally naked. She appears to have been, molested and at least knocked out and killed, even though we find out later that that's not actually the case. And then it becomes this kind of comedy of errors where he tries to recreate all the things that he's come across and then try to fix the things. Now, and again, try to fix the things that he's caused while he's trying to correct everything that he's also damaged in the timeline. It turns out that the girl ends up falling off of his roof. There's a whole series of things that happens, and it just piles upon one another. And it's so much damn fun. This movie is so good. And again, I don't almost like it's. I don't want to like give too much away. I mean, although we kind of given it away, but honestly, that happens so quickly, and you can kind of see that that's going to happen pretty straight away.
Right.
It is so much fun watching this. Watching Hector try to undo the wrongs that he's done, and then just further getting himself. It's stuck in the mud. There's an episode of The Simpsons where they go to the La Brea tar pits, and Homer gets stuck in the La Brea tar pits, and he's like, "I'm going to try to pull my feet out with." He's like, his feet are in the tar. He's like, "I'm going to try to pull my feet out with my hands." And his hands get stuck. He's like, "And now I'm going to try to pull my hands out with my face," and he just shoves his face into the La Brea. And this is that in a nutshell.
Complicate it and make everything
is
worse.
What this movie is.
It is so much fun. It is so much fun, and you're right. They get to the reveal, I think, pretty quickly.
Yeah, within the first 15, 20 minutes. And it's not really the point. It
doesn't matter. No, I mean, what matters is the why that comes next, or all the things that come next. And I mean, the ending of this film too, where he just sits down and tells his wife, "Don't worry, we've got just stay right there. We've got time."
Right.
And then we see everything else starting to sort of go back around, go back into that loop. I have no idea what the movie is trying to speak to but also like, I don't care. It's just so much fun.
Did you happen to see his follow-up, The Colossus, with Stathis and
Anne Hathaway?
Anne Hathaway.
Right, where they are controlling these monsters when they're in this sort of playground sand pit. These monsters across the world. Right? Yes. Yeah.
I actually got to meet him at a screening of that movie.
Oh, cool.
And I was gushing about time crimes, and I was like, yeah, this was. I mean, I like this movie. I'm just a huge fan of time crime. I mean, he was kind of like, oh, that's nice.
That was like
please don't,
at that point that would have been 7-8 years ago.
Yeah,
from in between Colossus.
Right. Yeah. And again, so highly recommend Time Crimes. It's such a fun movie and so like silly and just so much fun to.
I do love Hector's kind of change throughout the film. By the end of it, he is almost a stoic about this. He's just, this is what I have to do. This is what I'm doing. I'm going to sit down and accept it and see what happens next. But at the beginning, he's like, I have to go kill that version of me that's with my wife. This is ridiculous. And of course, that just leads to all the shit. But it's so much fun.
All right, next movie.
Okay. Road Games.
All right.
Did you know about this film before?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this comes up because Tarantino was one of a big champion of this movie. So it has such a great iconic VHS and cover and poster.
The poster's great. The poster's fantastic.
It taps into all of that type of. That type of just kind of B movie thriller horror kind of thing, and it's like I said, so yeah, I'd seen this before.
Okay, because I hadn't. It came up so before we made these lists, it showed up on Criterion, and I was like, oh, Mike Hammer. I'm always down to check out Stacy Keach because of Mickey Splain's Mike Hammer was on TV when I was a kid. So, but I'll always look and see what else.
He's our parents' Joaquin Phoenix, basically.
Yes. No, you're right.
Aside from the cleft palate, he's also just not attractive enough to be a leading man, but somehow he kills
he does. He's always so interesting, so good. Oh, he's great in this film.
One thing, and again, I'll let you describe it here in a second, but before I lose this thought, Keach and Curtis are amazing in this movie, and I want to watch 100 more movies with those two people in them.
Absolutely.
It is like you go back, and it's very easy to dismiss Jamie Lee Curtis's career, especially up to that point, where she's been a box office draw. She's killing it as a final girl, and she's like the horror scream queen. Yep. But man, she's so good in this. She's so self-assured in this.
And their chemistry.
Yeah.
When they're in the
crazy.
truck together, it's great.
And it's crazy that like Keach is killing it as well. Like he's just like this is a one-man show for the majority of this movie. And a lot of it, he's funny, he's dynamic, he's engaging. He's that 70s kind of like machismo where he's not built, but he's big enough to like throw a kick and a punch or two.
Yeah.
But he's
like
also
just enough to get away.
Right. Yeah. But he's also kind of like doughy and also kind of dumb in a sense. But
very much. Just smart enough to know like, wait, something's not right, but not smart enough to really figure everything out. I mean, it's very sort of 70s, early 80s too, the way they talk about women, the way they talk about other people. I mean, just the kind of language around everything. So Stacy Keach is this semi-truck driver named Quid, and he's in rural Australia. There's two things going on. There's a butcher strike, and there's someone killing women right around.
Those two things typically go hand in hand.
Those two things. And yes, they do. So Quid, Stacy Keach, drives around with his pet dingo named Boswell. And, so they pull into a city. Stacy Keach is tired, wants to find a motel. But the last room has been taken up by this man in a green van who has a woman along with him. This woman was a hitchhiker that Keach had seen on the road before, but he's not allowed to pick up hitchhikers, right? Company policy. Anyway, so he has to sleep in the truck with Boswell. He gets a call from the office. He's got to go pick up another load of dead hogs in a refrigerated truck.
As one does.
Boswell, the dog, is sniffing at these garbage bags outside the motel in the morning. And Keach notices that the man from the green van is paying too much attention to what his dog is doing. Then on his way to Perth with his load of meat, right, Quid passes by a bunch of different characters who exist really just kind of as obstacles to him kind of overcoming, it's him to overcome on the road as he is in a way like pursuing this van. Also, they're just kind of ridiculous, funny characters as well.
Right. Yeah. They're very 70s, out of the blue. They're the typical people you would find in a 70s movie.
Right.
They're obnoxious, they're loud, they're painted with a really broad brush.
There's pains in the asses, right? I mean, this movie is funny. I mean, there are just like funny moments the entire time.
A lot of what he says, a lot of the dialogue that Stacy Keach has is genuinely funny. I mean, just laugh out loud funny. So
he's on the road and he sees the man from the van on the side of the road bearing garbage bags, and he's got this like cooler with him, right? And so Keach starts to ask questions, wonder what's going on. Like, this is a couple times I've seen this guy, and he starts to pursue the van, but it's too far, and again it gets away. So he eventually decides to pick up Jamie Lee Curtis, who's been hitchhiking, even though it's against company policy. Her name is Pamela, but Quid, Stacy Keach, calls her Hitch because she's a hitchhiker. It's so cute, right? And so, and this is their meet cute right on the side of the road. So they talk, they get to know each other. They talk about the serial killer in the van, and then they eventually encounter the van again at a service station. Jamie Lee Curtis, Pamela, decides to go sneak into the van because they think that the man is in the bathroom. And so Keach is going to go confront the man in the bathroom. She's going to go get evidence, but it turns out the man is asleep in the van and wrangles and captures Jamie Lee Curtis. There's some poor guy who's riding a motorcycle that's in the bathroom that Stacy Keach has like some kind of tire iron, I don't know, some metal object that he's going to hit him with, and his dingo. So this guy's just like, what the fuck is going on, right?
Of how long they spoke about this plan, it's very poorly executed.
It's terrible, right? It's a terribly executed plan. So he jumps back in his truck and he goes after the van, and as he catches...
Well, first off, he wrecks the guy's motorcycle.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, he wrecks the guy. He steals the guy's motorcycle, wrecks it, gets back, right, jumps in the truck, telling everyone to get away with his dingo. And he starts to chase after the van. And when he catches up to the van, he sees what he thinks is Jamie Lee Curtis in the passenger seat enjoying herself. And he starts to mutter and mumble things to his dog, as a man would who's just been rejected.
Right. And he thinks he's second guessing himself that this guy's actually a murderer, and that Jamie Lee Curtis was always just putting him on, and this was a whole thing.
And then and as this drive progresses, he's going towards Perth with his load. Something interesting happened in the film where he stops talking out loud, and we get like internal monologue. Mm-hmm. And I didn't quite understand that because the dog's right there. Just keep talking to the dog. But it was an interesting shift.
There is a scene in this movie that is very Beautiful Mind, where you start seeing the calculations in his head start crossing over. And it's really just lines on the road, but I could not help but think of like Russell Crowe and like the or
in his head.
Yeah. Or Galifianakis in Hangover, where all these things are just passing through.
Or Ben Affleck in The Accountant when he writes on the windows with the marker.
Right.
It's the same thing.
But it was so like, that scene was so funny to me because you're right. It was just like, he pulls back inward and it's just like, and you start seeing all the roads start going across the screen.
Right. Yes. He kind of comes back to this idea that, no, wait, maybe she is in trouble, or this guy might have killed her because, oh, that's right. His back door of the tractor trailer had been open and is banging, against the truck. And so he stops and he's like, wait, did I lock that? Did I not lock that? So he thinks that this guy put something in there, more specifically put her in there. Mm-hmm. So he then chases after him again. He finally catches up to this guy and chases the van through the streets of Perth with the cops chasing him. And he catches up to the guy. They get in this fight. And he starts to strangle this guy with the guitar string, Garrett that he'd been killing women with. And the cops, of course, think that Stacy Keach, think that our man Quid is the killer.
Because previously he had been accosted by all of the townsfolk that he'd already so the people
that pisses off because he's American and has a dingo.
Right. The people that he met along the way, and especially when he stole the motorcycle, now the cops are basically after him. So the cops pull up on this scene. They see him trying to kill what appears to be just another Australian, and they draw their guns on him while the killer starts to slowly slink into the background. Away.
Boswell, our dingo's barking, right? Which Stacy Keach was like, whoa, he can bark because dingoes aren't supposed to bark. Yeah,
dingoes can't bark.
Great, right? So is barking at the van, and they find Pamela wrapped up in a sleeping bag. And she's like, no, you idiots, it's that guy, right?
Pamela almost doesn't understand why they're arresting him.
Right,
and like,
right.
That
like,
almost
what are you doing?
And it's like that whole scene, you clearly, you've seen these movies before. You want this to be resolved because it's a tension building scene. And you're like, okay, come on, just say something. Just say it.
Would you get to it?
Yeah. And then, but she's so like pissed at him.
At Quid, right? At Keach.
Right.
You said he was in the bathroom. I mean, they argue about that. This movie is so funny and silly, and it's not really horror, but it's a different kind of like Hitchcockian slow burn thriller. It's Rear Window on a semi-truck.
Right.
I mean,
absolutely.
It's
100%.
It's so much fun. Yeah.
And I think that's what Franklin set out to make, to be quite honest, is that he had seen, I watched a couple things about him, and he had seen that, and that was kind of the premise, is that he had some money, and that was, what if we did this, and kind of set that on there. This was at the time, this kind of set off the whole Ozploitation movement, if you will. So all these kind of genre films that were made in Australia were... That's basically, they're all called OZ exploitation films.
And sort of like the Australian New Wave
Sure, right? Absolutely. Right. Franklin would have before we go into him, there's a couple of scenes that were just like, one didn't make any sense to me whatsoever. When Keach, and again, this didn't have a short running time that you needed to put filler in. This was an hour and 40, so there was some movement there. But when they're driving through the alley, and so Keach has got his semi, and he's barely making it through this alley. Right. And the cops are chasing him. There's a scene where a guy walks out into the alley to see what the commotion is, and his glasses fall off. And then the semi drives over his glasses. He reaches back down, and then has to stand back up. And the cops drive over his glasses. And it's just and that guy, you don't know who that guy is.
No.
You never see him ever again. You haven't seen him before. You don't see him again. But that was just a thing where, okay, there's just out of all the destruction that happens in this movie, where Quid actually blows up a guy's boat. Like he drives into
He drives
his boat
through
and
the
just
boat.
destroys
Well,
it.
the guy won't get out of the way. I mean,
Right,
he's like
chasing the-
blocking
right.
him because he's trying to get to the van, but he won't get out of the way.
Yeah, this movie is funny. It is really, like I said, beside the fact that it's got two amazing leads, I think it's really, really well shot and well done. The opening murder is so stylistic and so beautifully shot.
Yeah.
That it really almost sets you up for a different kind of movie. It was very De Palma-esque, that first like opening scene, and you kind of expect it to take itself a little bit more seriously. It really is a nice way to kind of lull you into, okay, well, I'm getting prepared for a duel or a breakdown type of film, and really kind of pulls back a little bit and allows you to breathe and allows you to have fun with these characters.
But still wonder what's going to happen. I mean, I think he still does a nice job of building that tension within moments, right?
Because by the time you do get, I mean, like, yes, you know that murders are happening, but you do actually, and these films do this a lot, where they kind of pull the rug out from underneath you, where maybe the green van isn't the one who's killing all of these. It could have very easily taken a left turn and something else was doing it. The old lady or what, and her husband or what have you, or the motorcycle guy.
Well, in the old lady that he ends up picking up because she forces him to stop. I mean, she starts to have questions about him. Mm-hmm. There's one moment where, even though she sees the guy digging on the side of the road too, she wonders if Stacey Keach isn't the killer, and runs away from him and almost falls off a cliff.
Right.
And dies.
And then she blames him
like,
for like pushing him off of, almost pushing her off of a cliff.
Right. When he was trying to help her. So yeah, I the tension is still there, and it just kind of comes and goes, which I think makes it even more enjoyable.
So this was directed by Richard Franklin. He went on to direct Psycho 2, Cloak and Dagger, and then he did Patrick, which was another kind of Australian horror film, and he did this great. It really wasn't great. He did this movie that had a naked Elizabeth Shue in it. You couldn't see anything, but she was naked anyway. Called Link. It was about it was an ape horror film where she's like doing something with a gorilla, and it's a terrible movie. But it was one as a young man enamored with Elizabeth Shue, I rented quite a bit.
Because we've all seen Adventures in Babysitting.
Of course we have. Many more times than I should care to admit. Right. But Psycho 2, I will say this about Psycho 2. And Cloak and Dagger is a Henry Thomas, Dabney Coleman, filmed in San Antonio. Really, really fun kids movie. If you have younger kids,
watch that with war games. Like pair those things back together.
It's a lot. It's really a lot of fun. Psycho 2 sounds on its surface like a horrible, horrible idea. Why would you ever make a sequel to a Hitchcocking thriller? Psycho 2 is a more than serviceable horror thriller that backs up Psycho. In fact, it focuses way more on Anthony Perkins and his psychosis, and the story is that he's finally getting out of the mental institution now that he's after the events of Psycho, and he's trying to come back, and it is really, really well done. So check that one out.
Okay.
All right, it's my turn?
Yeah. I
think I already looked at this one. We did. We needed to wad these up and do a better job of...
What? Next time you can write things on little pieces of legal paper.
Okay. The next movie is Goodnight Mommy.
Goodnight Mommy. Do you want to know my opening notes for that?
Sure.
Vibes, man. Fucking vibes.
So Goodnight Mommy, and this is the 2014 Austrian version, not the 2022 American version, which we will talk about.
I don't want to.
We don't have to talk about it, is what I meant to say.
I'll make a couple comments.
So we find ourselves in this house where these two young boys are playing, and they're playing in the field, and they get along great, but they're twin boys. They're pretty much tied at the hip. They seem to be on their own. I think that their dad was there at one point with them at the house, and then
Do we ever see the dad in this version? I don't think we ever see the dad
in this version.
At one point, the mom explains to some people asking for food bank donations, or Red Cross donations, that there was an accident with the father or something. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No. I think
because in the American version we see him like right away.
Right.
And I was like, what the fuck is this?
So we see two young boys playing in this house, and then all of a sudden their mother comes back. So apparently they've been living there on their own or with their father, and their father leaves while the mom comes back. But she comes back, and she has bandages all over her face. And it's this awkward kind of interaction between these two groups, the twins and the mom, trying to get back into the groove of being twins and moms. And there's the mother comes in and she's just had some sort of surgery, some sort of procedure to her face. And so she's clearly in some pain. She's clearly in discomfort. And so she's asking the boys to, to keep it down, to not go outside, to only play in the yard.
Keep the blinds drawn.
To keep the blinds drawn and not to make too much noise. Don't bring animals in. And all the while, the boys are 12, 9, 8, whatever year. Yeah, they're boys. They're young boys who are rambunctious. They have a cockroach collection that they take care of. They, they're just they go out and they play hide and seek in the fields. They jump on the trampolines, and all the while, they're not able to get past their mom being a little bit short-tempered. She's seemingly upset with them all the time. And so they come to the conclusion that the person in the mask is not their mom. And they go about then torturing this woman to make her tell them where their real mom is. And that's the premise that we're set up with. So really, very quickly, if you've seen the poster of this movie, it is all in red and black, and these boys are looking over you, the viewer of this movie, and basically they're in their mom's face, demanding to know where their real mom is. So this becomes a very harrowing, just brutal horror film where you don't really know which side is right. And up until the full runtime, you don't know what happens or what is actually going on. You don't know, are the boys right and this is not their mother, or is the mother right and she's just upset for some reasons. And so we're going to ruin this. We're going to twist the movie.
Because they really wait till the end of this one before they...
Yeah, this is 10 minutes before the movie ends.
And we realize exactly what had happened.
So what it turns out is the reason that the mom was having this surgery and the reason that she had been away is that there had been an accident and that one of the twin boys was killed in the accident. And the other twin had not ever come to grips with that and was still acting as if the twin was still there. So during the time of the movie, the one twin is saying, I need you to talk to us. I don't know why you're not talking to the other twin. I need you to acknowledge all of us. And the mom gets increasingly more agitated because she knows that there's only one boy there.
Right.
At one point, the boy draws a picture, and it's signed from both of the boys. It has both the boys in the picture, and the mom. They're all holding hands. So this is it is a gut punch the entire time. You're watching this movie. It is very brutal. She's tied up. They're burning her with a magnifying glass. They put roaches in her mouth. Although a lot of it is seen as like dream sequences or fantasy sequences. There's one sequence where the mom goes into the woods and takes off her bandages, but you never see her face. And that's one of the things that the movie does really, really well is that the mom is some sort of celebrity. She's like some sort of
she was like in a choir, right? Wasn't she a singer in a choir?
I think that she was some sort of news anchor, right? Because they do the 20 questions thing at the beginning of the film, and they're like asking. It was like person, place, or thing. And she's got the sticky note to her head. And they're like, am I famous? Am I a person? Am I famous? Do I know you? Like, does she like animals? And they're like, oh, yeah, kind of. And like, do you know her? Yeah, you know her pretty well. But she never guesses that it's her.
She was a choir member famous on local television.
Okay, then maybe that was it.
I mean, look, Wikipedia can be edited by anybody. Maybe I just edited that right now. But right.
But there's pictures of her, and they're kind of out of focus pictures of her on the wall.
And with one of her friends who looks just like her, or looks enough like her that they're like, oh, and wears similar clothes.
And she has different colored eyes because of contacts, and they weren't aware of that.
Right.
So at the last 10 minutes, you understand what's going on, and you've been given hints throughout.
They do a nice job of hiding it.
They do a really nice job. One of the things they do, like when the boys are fighting with one another, because what happens is the boy that's dead, his ghost or whatever you want to say it, whatever his influence is on the other twin, he starts to get upset because he's clearly the one being ignored, and he doesn't want the other twin to believe that the mom is their mom. And so when they get into a fight, once they're done with the fight, they're both bleeding in the exact same place in the exact same manner. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they do a great. This whole movie really is. I mean, like I said, it plays its cards very close to the vest. It does not give up anything, and so by the time that it happens, and you realize, okay, the twin is going to go into this and to continue the illusion where he ends up killing the mother in the most brutal, burning way possible. That is a horrid scene. It's hard to watch.
Awful. It really is.
And it really just kind of leaves you with that. Then the movie essentially ends. The mother is dead and the twins now live in this house essentially together. It's good. It's really good. It's a hard watch. It's good.
It's moody and it's creepy and the kids are creepy and the mom is creepy and mean, but yet you understand exactly why she's frustrated. You never question, okay, she's only talking to one. I mean, moms who have just moms in general will get upset at one sibling and then only talk to I mean, it all made sense to me being the oldest of 5.
Right.
I've seen these things kind of happen, not to this extreme, but it's like everyone's creepy, and it's pretty clear, I think, throughout. Again, this comes back to trauma and grief and how these people are handling it and dealing with it, and not very well.
Right. And you look at the mother, you can clearly see that she's dealing with the loss of celebrity. She's dealing with the loss of a sense of herself.
The loss of a son.
Right. The loss of a son, most likely a loss of a husband in some sort of way.
Marriage in some way. Yeah.
So it's very, and she's trying to keep together and to pretend for the son that's still around to allow him and provide him some grace, and she simply can't do it. And she does a fairly good job of it until she gets tied up in her bed and she can't get away.
Right.
But stylistically, everything about this, the house is so great, the bandages are so great. It never really, aside from the shaky head, scene out in but which makes sense in context, never really goes too fantastical, really.
Right. And anytime it does go fantastical, you assume as a viewer that this is what the kids are thinking, or this is what the twins imagine is going on.
Right.
Even if the mom is going outside at night because the sun would hurt her skin and she just wants some fresh air, maybe they're like, oh, she's eating bugs, or
right.
Because they're like 11, 10, I don't know.
Yeah, they're boys.
And so there's that imaginative aspect to it.
And it plays it so down the middle where you're like, okay, you can see both sides of it. The entirety of the film, as you're watching it, you're going, you go back and forth. You go back and forth just like the kids do. Okay, clearly she's probably being too harsh. We don't know the entirety of it.
But then also you're a brat.
But yeah, these kids are kind of shitty.
Yeah.
Like they're also, and then once it hits the point where they tied her up, you're like, oh shit, no, this is getting real. Like,
this is what I didn't like about the American version. I felt that the American version was just was playing its cards right away, and it made for maybe if I had seen that one first, but
maybe
I turned it off.
But everything was so amplified.
Right.
And that's where we get into trouble with American remakes, is that the subtlety is all lost. And so my biggest problem with the remake is you shouldn't, I won't say you can't, but you shouldn't remake a film and have it be the same title,
right?
And then have the twist be exactly the same. If they had have done something different, if you had a new spin on it, where maybe the twins didn't die or something happened altogether differently, then I can understand why you're doing it. But every design change that they made, Naomi Watts' bandages weren't nearly as frightening.
Right. None of it was.
Right. None of it was frightening. All of the actions taken by Naomi Watts then kind of led you to believe that she really wasn't the mother because she was kind of being ultimately bitchy. And then there's that scene where she literally pulls her skin off. And that was kind of overdone. So like every move that the original made right and kept down, this one was terrible. It really was just, and again, once you've let the cat out of the bag, the only reason to watch is to see if they do something interesting with it. So and again, these films weren't good. And you could even argue that the first one wasn't that great.
Right.
But
vibes.
Right. Well, and I actually I'm just talking about, so there's another example of this where in the most recent Pet Sematary remake, which again, this is not, they're not art house films. I get that. But they changed who died. They changed which child died. At least you're trying to do something different with the story.
Subvert what we think we already know.
Right. Because again, otherwise just go Gus Van Sant and do a shot by shot remake and with American accents.
Right.
because you did nothing to you brought nothing to the table for this film, and it really kind of diminishes the original, because once you've seen this one, then you know what the end is, and so that's a bad thing,
right? And we're not and as Bong Joon-ho told us, right, we are allergic to 2-inch words on the bottom of a screen.
Yeah, evidently.
So, all right, let's talk about our last one, which is Kuroneko.
Oh, we don't have to pull the paper.
And let's just do it briefly, and we'll move on to Let the Right One In, I think, unless you really want to dig into this. But one reason I put this on the list...
It's because you're pretentious?
Yes. One, because I'm pretentious. I mean, most of my movies were kind of pretentious, weren't they?
No. I like them all.
Okay,
I actually really like them all.
They can still be pretentious. But one reason I put this on the list was because of the beginning and because of the inciting event, right? Where two women, a mother and her son's wife, live alone in this cottage in a bamboo grove. This is during feudal Japan. There's a civil war going on, so they're alone. The husband is off fighting, and a troop of samurai come by the house and end up raping and killing these two women and burn their house down. I know this isn't the first time this has happened in film. I think, Bergman's The Virgin Spring comes to mind, and I'm sure there's others, but this is 1968. Right? This is 4 years before The Last House on the Left.
Yeah.
And those are, similar kind of actions happening, but vastly different films. And this is something I find interesting in how these films kind of deal with that rape revenge story.
Yeah, Craven didn't find his voice right away.
Well, but
I agree with you, right, that it is 68 is an interesting time, and again, this is done with, by today's standards, they're pretty much kid gloves, right?
Oh, sure.
But this idea, especially coming in, again, I'm not a huge historian of Japanese history at this particular point in time, but I can't imagine that women were seen with a ton of agency, especially when you're talking about, and so this idea of two women who were then killing their own countrymen, granted, they did they were treated horribly. They all deserved. Although at the end of the day, the premise is these two women, they are raped and murdered by this troop of samurai. They go to the underground, make a pact with the devil, and essentially they come back. They're able to live on the earth, but they have to kill every samurai that they come across. And unfortunately, their son, the son and the husband, right?
They're the same person.
Right. No, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to confuse the point. He ends up becoming a samurai through some good deeds, heroic deeds, and then he is tasked with hunting down these monsters who are killing samurai. And of course, the women now then, of course, are troubled because they have to kill every samurai that they come across. And or live in hell forever. Right. And how do they do that with their son, who's been nothing but noble? This movie has an interesting history because it's not quite as well known as the other films like Onibaba or the other ones that are in that same era. Right. This came out at Cannes in '68. And that was the year
Cannes got canceled
because of Truffaut and Mal and
the riots.
Goddard. And they were basically protesting somebody on the board who got dismissed. And so this movie didn't come out in the U.S. till many, many, many years later, and to no fanfare. And also at that point, everyone had found Kurosawa and found all these. So they already dove in. So a lot of the things that this film was doing with the wire work, which was really interesting and a whole lot of fun. This is a quiet movie, even given the themes of what we're talking about. The samurai are brought in. They're made. They're given booze to get them drunk, and then they're off in some sort of unspectacular way. Right. By the time that you get to the last, the husband son samurai, and there's the fight scenes. Like I said, I think that was where I had the most fun with the movie, was where they're kind of climbing up poles and like spinning around, and when she actually turns into the cat and the samurai cuts the arm of the cat off. There's a lot of beauty in this film. It's so lush in how it's really
the tones, the black and white tones, the contrast. I like the idea of it being a quiet film because it is a quiet film, despite the themes.
And it is on Criterion Channel as well. If you have not seen it, I would recommend. It's like I said, it's easy. I mean, aside from having to read it, it's easy. So,
right. Anything else about Current Echo? I really like them.
No.
I enjoy those.
I don't know.
I also think like Japanese directors, at least in this kind of period, but 50s, 60s, maybe a little further on, did some of the best work of filmmakers in looking to the past to comment on the present and what might lie ahead, just for what that's worth. I mean, I mean that's not an original idea.
Well, no. I mean, but this is a very progressive film for this time, and and to set it when you set it, it speaks to something that's there. I mean, and so I think it's a courageous move, even if, and again, I don't know how well it was received internally in Japan, but I mean that's not an easy thing to do. Yeah. I will say too that these movies are an interesting contrast to what's actually being put out in America at this time. Because again, take Last House on the Left. I mean, again, Last House on the Left is definitely a 42nd Street kind of film where it is grotesque in a lot of ways. And it's also ridiculously silly in a lot of ways.
Of course. But I mean, that shift, I mean, horror around 1970 really shifts, doesn't it?
Yeah, you're coming out of the Hays Code with all of the late 60s films, and people are trying to find their one. You're coming out of the Hammer era of horror, right? So you're kind of coming out of the
Mike Hammer, Mickey Spillane. Sorry.
Yeah, cutting back to that, do you think that Road Games and the voiceover helped Keach get the Mickey Spillane role?
Yes, I think so. I think that was a direct audition.
Like, who do we know who can do great voiceover?
Stacy Keach.
So yeah, coming out of like the like I said, the Hays Code, and seeing all these films in the foreign area that were showing sex and blood and realistic violence and drug dealing and all these kind of things that were coming out, horror dives directly into that, and so there's not a whole lot of subtlety in American horror. Not even something like Rosemary's Baby. There's things, but they're not being made by American directors. There's Don't Look Now. There's movies that come out in that time frame, but they're not being made in America.
Okay, so speaking of another, we did do it. We got through 10 of those, and it only took us 17 combined hours.
We're very sorry.
We'll be quick. So speaking of other horror movies that are foreign, let's talk about Let the Right One In. And this was screened at the Fort Worth Film Club this past Wednesday. So let's try and build on this excellent conversation that we started. I don't know, where do you want to start with this one?
Where do I want to start with this
Other than just how gorgeous it is. Let's start with the opening shot of the snow falling and how pretty that is.
There's so much to unpack in this movie.
Yes.
And so just to take a step back, if you haven't seen the movie, really it is a coming of age story about a young bullied boy named Oscar.
Who's 12.
He's 12 years old. He has no friends. He lives with a single mother, and his alcoholic father is not present. He lives in this kind of, they don't have a whole lot of money. He lives in this, what looks to be sort of project-y type of apartment complex. It's kind of like
Cold War housing.
Yeah.
I mean, Sweden's close enough to the USSR at that time. I mean, I think there is that same kind of idea. Yeah, I don't know how communist Sweden was, right? 82, yeah, suburbs of Stockholm. So I'm not sure historically how closely aligned with that kind of communism Sweden was, but you get the idea that that's what it is.
And the entire town looks to be industrial, looks to be kind of blue collar, not a whole lot of money. And Oscar is living alone with his mother. He's an undersized boy. He's kind of awkward, kind of got a goofy haircut, and is slight and has no friends whatsoever. He keeps to himself. His mom works, so most of the time he's left to his own devices. Occasionally he'll steal money out of her purse to buy candies, but that's basically it. When we see Oscar for the first time, looks like he's confronting some sort of inner demon. He's basically having an inner dialogue with himself in this tree where he's confronting a bully essentially, and he's telling the tree. This is all imagined about how he would like to be able to respond to these bullies that are making his life miserable.
He's a squeal pig.
In the book, he's actually chubby, so that's the reason they call him Pig in the book.
So I was going to say this is a 2008 film based on a book.
I'm not sure when the book came out. I think 2004 maybe.
Okay.
John Alvin Lundquist.
And he wrote the screenplay as well.
Correct.
Which apparently Alfredson was sort of reluctant to allow to happen because he was like, oh my God, we're going to have all this shit in here that I don't know what to do with. But what was it? Was it Lundquist?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, Lundquist, I think maybe.
The author of
John
the novel,
Alvin, Swede name.
cut a lot of stuff out. And so Alfredson was really sort of pleased with it. And I think this, and I'm sure we'll get to it, but the way they deal with one specific aspect of what was cut out, I thought was interesting and pretty well done.
Yeah, no,
but
I will say, fucking me, Jesus Christ. Having read the book and seen the movie, and I saw them in reverse. I did that in reverse order, but what was left out, I don't think hurt the film at all. No. I think that he was. I agree that is a very hard thing for an author to do. It's amazing that he was able to do it so very well.
Because one thing I love about this film is that there are two characters. There's Oscar, and then he meets Ellie, who appears to be a 12-year-old girl just like him, who's just moved in to the apartment next to him.
At some point one night, he sees some people moving in very, very late at night. This guy is carrying a very large...
And he sees... But he also sees Ellie, like, walking, because it's...
Correct.
Because, spoiler, she's a vampire. But back to this, there's two characters. Everyone else is really filler. Everyone else is there just to sort of support them in their pathway of development as characters. Everyone else is kind of cardboard, and that's fine.
This is Oscar's story.
Yes.
100%. This is Oscar's coming of age story, essentially. This is a 12-year-old boy in a school, in a school semester, somewhat coming into his own and befriending a young girl. That is his story. Yeah. And it's definitely not Ellie's story. There's way more story for her to be told. This is Oscar's story, I think, through and through. And so he sees her come into the apartment complex. He meets her one night out on the playground because he's out there by himself because his mom is working, and that's the only places his mom will let him play. And Ellie is initially standoffish because clearly she's a vampire and she doesn't need to make friends. Oscar doesn't really understand what's going on. He doesn't know that Ellie's a vampire. Cues. She has a smell about her that's different, but Oscar also is just desperate for a friend, and so
human contact,
right? I mean. So whatever happens, like he doesn't need to be when he asks, when he tells her that she smells funny, he's not meaning it to be anything other than curious. She doesn't wear shoes. She doesn't wear a coat when it's cold outside, and she basically tells him straight up at the front, we can't be friends. So, and Oscar's like, oh, that's a weird thing to say to me. The first thing you say out of your mouth, but okay, I guess not. Right? I don't want to be your fucking friend anyway.
That way.
So ultimately, Ellie does end up befriending Oscar. She helps him. She advises him on how to deal with his bullies, and all the while, the town starts to become thrown into some tumult because Ellie's handler is now killing people trying to kill people to give her the blood that she needs.
So we get this sort of idea that she doesn't go out and sort of kill her own food. Sorry for that kind of description. But did he, his name is Håkan?
Håkan is the name, yes.
Goes out, drugs someone, strings him up from a tree, slits her throat and collects the blood and brings it back. And when he fails at that one night, she gets angry and goes out and kills and feeds on one of the neighbors, essentially, or someone who lives very close. And who has a kind of circle of friends that hang out at this bar, and the local cat man, it's not a cat lady, it's a cat man, sees this take place, and so these friends become more watchful, but that's part of where the town, I guess, kind of gets into like what's going on or sort of what's happening. And
I think the implication of why Ellie doesn't go out and do this on her own is because I don't know if she can control it if she does it on her own. The idea is that they're trying to, they're moving around because the murders happen and eventually they get found out.
Right.
And that Ellie has a difficulty because
impulse control.
She has it because she's
a vampire
and she's 12.
Right.
Right. So she has been stuck in this suspended animation where she hasn't grown. And she even said, so she still has, she still has childish affectations, right? She's still interested in puzzles. She's still drawn to Oscar and the friendship that Oscar has. She's worldly, and she knows that she has to do this, but she's also still a child. So that if she were the ones to go out and to feed all the time, she wouldn't be able to control it. She has a handler there that can take care of it for her to kind of keep her under wraps to a certain extent. At least that's the feel that I got on it. So go ahead. No. So Eli's handler is more, he does not want this job, essentially. He's bumbling. He's older. I think you get to feel that Eli has forced him into this servitude.
This is really interesting that you just started to call her Eli instead of Ellie.
Good point.
Because okay, we should come back to that, right? But yeah, the handler one night really messes up, and right before he gets caught, he tries to kill a teenage boy. His friends come back, right, to find him, and then they more or less walk in on this happening, and so to keep from getting caught or to keep from getting identified, he pours acid over his face and sort of disfigures himself so the cops can't go, oh, we know where you are. People can identify him.
This young girl.
Ellie/Eli comes to visit him in the hospital. He offers his neck. She feeds and then throws him out the window. And again, a brutal but beautiful shot of him falling from that window and hitting his head on sort of an awning. Okay, so this Ellie-Eli thing.
So yes, so it turns out that, so as one young 12-year-old boy, prepubescent, starts to fall for Ellie, or at least starts to have feelings for Ellie, his friendship starts to deepen. She basically tells him, hey, I'm not a girl.
Over and over, like several times.
Right, so we can't, Oscar asks her Ellie to go steady. She's like, what does that mean? Like, I don't know. We can't, and she's like, does anything have to change? And he's like, no, then fine. Yeah, we can go steady. Yeah. One night, Oscar and Ellie are alone. Now at this point, Ellie is alone because her handler is completely gone.
And this is after he's found out that she's a vampire.
I think so. Yeah, because he would have known, because
when she comes to his door, because isn't that when she changes clothes?
Correct. Well, because she has to, because he didn't let her in, basically.
Right, so. right.
Did he see her attack the other woman at this point? I think that he turned away. Like, they were out together, and the woman.
So he cuts his hand. They go to the place where the teenagers hang out, yes, and he's like, "Let's do a blood bond." And she flips out after he slits his hand, and blood starts dropping on the floor.
So she drops to suck the blood off the floor,
and that's when he finds it. And then she goes out and attacks.
Correct. Okay. Woman. Right. So she attacks the woman to get her full feed. Mm-hmm. Yes, and then Oscar comes to the realization that she's a vampire, and so Ellie comes back to Oscar's apartment. Oscar's mom is not there. Ellie's asking Oscar, can she come in? You have to invite me in. And he's like, well, what happened if I don't? Yeah. So Ellie crosses.
He's kind of being a dick.
Right. Yeah. Because I think he's pissed about the whole, she didn't probably tell him that he was a vampire. Right, it's like he secrets between
a 12-year-old boy.
Right. Yeah. She crosses the threshold and starts to bleed from her eyeballs, from her mouth, from her ears. And then Oscar freaks out, realizes that he still loves his friend.
Hemiophilia of rejection.
It's a real thing.
Yeah. At least for vampires.
And Oscar invites him in. And so, but at this point, their clothes are all bloody. So Oscar invites Eli to go get clothes out of his mom's closet. And when he peeks on her, as 12-year-old boys are wont to do, he sees her naked, and he sees some scars in her pubic area.
And there's no explanation. No really. Genitalia there either.
No genitalia at all. Now, we learn in the book that Eli was mutilated, and that's basically how he was turned, is that he was mutilated as a young boy, and but he was a boy who was mutilated and then turned into a vampire.
Because in the film, Ellie, regardless of what we assign to that character when we first see the film, they are pretty androgynous. The voice
Both of them
is
are, really.
weird. Okay, I was going to say that. Yeah, both of them are very androgynous. And this is what, okay, I'm going to do this, right? I'm going to bring up queer theory and how.
But horror is
horror and fantasy and fairy tales are ripe with queer. No, exactly. That's why I'm bringing it up. I just look. I mean, this is a podcast about movies, and I'm like, well, the queer theory of Judith Butler. I mean, this is what I. So, but no, like horror, fairy tales, fantasies, yes, these are a place where the narratives are easily queered, whether they are intended to be that way or not. Using that critical lens makes so much sense. And I think in this movie it does as well. And especially thinking in terms of relationships and the sort of affront and the danger, quote unquote, that queer relationships pose to heteronormative society, right? Or queer relationships posing the danger to these, institutions of hegemony like traditional marriage. And even in this film, the idea of like queer temporality, this idea of queer time. Eli, androgynous or not, as a queer character exists outside of heteronormative time and becomes even more of a quote unquote danger to that society. And I just think it's so cool and interesting, and how they do that coupled with the relationship idea, because she, as we see her, or at least as we're kind of meant to see her in the film as a she can't reproduce. Right? They can't have an actual like long-term relationship because she will never grow older than 12.
And to the point that Oscar comes to the realization that it doesn't really matter.
Right.
So, I mean, yes, he's drawn to her because he thinks that she's a girl. And that is normally what you would do. By the time that he finds out that she's not, and she's a vampire, clearly this is obviously extremes, but that they're just friends, and whether they're going steady or not, or whether nothing had to change.
Yeah.
Right. That's a beautiful, like that whole thing, like even that whole statement of like, does anything have to change? No, nothing has to change. We're just friends. We're in love. Right. It's just
us. And isn't that what any kind of relationship is? I mean, seriously, platonic relationship or a romantic relationship, they're defining that relationship themselves. They're not letting anyone outside of that relationship tell them how they should be.
Hey, Brock.
Yeah.
Nothing has to change.
Cool. Then we can go steady. Okay.
There might be some questions later, but nothing has to change.
But they can do all this without falling into that trap or falling into that safety of binary oppositions, of clear identity. Right? They don't have to function on that kind of timeline or that identity line.
Yeah, absolutely.
And this is what's so cool about like the horror genre. And I hate the term genre. I do. I don't like it. I don't like titles. But this is what's so cool about that and about movies like this is that they can do this. They can sort of queer that narrative without having to make a giant statement or wave a flag of saying, this is what we're talking about.
And to draw the audience and to make the exact same conclusion that Oscar is making, right? Where you're brought in, oh, it's a young boy and a young girl. Great. That's normal. I'll be okay with this. By the time that it gets to where you need to be okay with it, you're okay with it.
You're already okay with it.
Right. It's so well done.
Yeah.
It's so well done. And so the movie kind of culminates. Ellie the town is starting to notice that people are getting killed, and Oscar's situation is becoming more and more tenuous. He's having a harder and harder time in school. At one point, Ellie has told him to strike back, so he strikes a young boy.
Who's bullying him? Who's bullying him?
And I'll get to this point after we talk about all the kind of the plot threads.
Okay,
but it's bullying him to the point. And so he takes a step back. He hits the kid in the ear with a hockey stick, slices the kid's ear in two, and causes significant damage to the kid. Of course, Oscar gets in trouble for that. And then it becomes a situation where that kid's older brother wants to take revenge on Oscar. And so they set up this elaborate plan, pseudo-elaborate for 12-year-olds and whatever high school kids, to lure Oscar to the school, to the town pool, to the school pool, and they are going to essentially drown him or poke one of his eyes out. They're basically going to hurt him really, really badly because he hurt his younger brother. And in this case, so we see Oscar is doing this after school strength training regimen. He's in a pool. He's he's dancing along to some music. He's so innocent and like so fun loving for the most part. And then the gym teacher gets called away because of a ruse that the kids set up, and they all come in and basically they grab Oscar by the hair and they say you need to hold your breath for 3 minutes, and if you do that, I'll only nick you on your cheek, but if you don't, I'm going to poke your eye out. Because an eye for an ear, right? And Oscar's like, it can't be done. Yeah. And then he just kind of like gives into the punishment.
And he thinks Ellie has left at this point.
Right, yeah. He thinks, and so Oscar, so Oscar then is underneath the water, and in one of, I think, and it may be hyperbole, but one of the greatest scenes in horror film history.
It's so fucking good.
Where you're watching Oscar try his damnedest to stay underwater.
You're watching him drown.
And you see a hand on his head, and then all of a sudden you start hearing things because you're under the water with Oscar. You start hearing things as you would if you were underwater, and all this commotion, and everyone is left except for the bullies. And all of a sudden you see feet just skirt across the top of the water.
That's so good.
And you see, and you hear this thud. And then all of a sudden, and all the time, Oscar has his eyes closed, completely has his eyes closed. And then you start to see that hand that holds Oscar's head is chopped off, and it floats into the water. And
the head floats in the water.
The head floats in the water. Still, Oscar keeps his eyes closed. Ellie picks him up out of the water and rescues him. And eventually they go off together. She gets back into her big chest, trunk, and her and Oscar take a train together to wherever the next town will be. It's implied that Ellie has money because she's been around for a long enough time where they've been able to steal, and take care of things. But there's
a big confrontation between the two of them at one point where he's like, "Oh, you steal these from the people you kill."
Right. Yes.
He's like, "What the fuck is up with that?"
He has a moralistic stance for a minute.
For like a second. And then he's like, "Nah, cool." Right. You're my friend. That scene in the pool is so good. It's so moving.
It's so
and
quiet,
kind of operatic.
Wait. Yes, yeah. It's because you're there with that kind of drowning out because you're underwater.
Everything's muffled,
right? Yeah. It is. It is.
And the fact that you don't see you see remnants of the action, you see bits of the action, but it isn't that sort of long take on violence or that long take on like a monster kill that we see in so many other movies or other vampire movies. And I just think it was really artfully and skillfully done.
Yeah, it's a delicious comeuppance for the bullies.
Yes,
but it's also not so gratuitous. Where you felt like
I didn't need to see kids get ripped apart like that.
Exactly.
Right. Okay, can we talk about what happens next with them? Because this is always, go ahead.
Well, yes, we can. So, but John Alvin actually did write a short story because I think he was somewhat upset with how it was interpreted after the film was done.
Okay.
But he did write a short story where Oscar and Eli are together after the fact. And eventually what essentially happens, and I have not read the short story, but I think what happens is that Eli eventually turns Oscar and they kind of badlands it together at that point.
Okay. Because on the face of it, this film is a love story. It's a story about two rejected people coming together to sort of define their own terms of how they're going to be together and exist in this world. And that is beautiful and lovely, and it's great. I really dig it. But then it's like, wait, what happens? Right. Did she have the same arrangement? Did the same thing happen with Haken or with caregivers before? Is this just a thing where she's like, I need to find another 12-year-old to take care of me for the next 60 years?
Right.
And that's maybe a cynical way to look at it, but I am kind of a realist.
But it is kind of a very Graduate-esque type ending, right?
Yes.
Where you're like, oh shit, now these people they've left. Like, what do they do now?
Yeah.
And Oscar, and it can be played where Eli, if you don't see them as a mentally 12-year-old person, entity, it can be seen as very grooming almost to a certain extent.
Right.
Where Oscar's now going to have to be like you said, to be the handler for Eli, to be the one who gets blood for her. Yeah. And what is he signing himself up for? Granted, his life wasn't great to begin with.
So he just wants to escape anyway. And I think this too all goes back to that kind of idea of queering the narrative that happens in horror too, where, okay, now the rules are different. We're not thinking of this necessarily. Well, okay, I think certain people on a certain side of the dial might see that grooming even more, but I think we can see it as a different type of relationship, a different type of progress or direction or purpose. Because of that, because of looking at it through that different kind of lens.
I think it's better you don't know. I think it's better that it ends.
It ends on an ellipsis.
Right. Yeah. And you just,
And it ends in a calling attention back to like The Graduate. I mean, The Graduate, the two of them know, oh shit, what do we do now? But in this one, Oscar had learned Morse code and then taught Ellie Morse code so they could tap out Morse code between their apartments. And she does that on the box as they're leaving. And it's kiss.
Kiss,
right?
yeah.
And then he taps back small kiss. And so there is this, again, like innocence and
very
joy.
Lost in translation if you don't actually know it. Morse code.
But it doesn't matter either. Just like I'm going to reference the Lost in Translation. It doesn't matter what he whispered to her at the end, right? What matters is the communication that's taking place between them.
One thing I want to touch on, these two, it's kind of a cliche that you never want to work with animals, or you never want to work with kids, right? These two young actors, and they really haven't done much. I don't think they're actors now. These are amazing performances, especially from Oscar. There are scenes when there are scenes when he's getting tortured or getting bullied and there's looks in his eyes or the expressions that he makes, and I'm fucking going to tear up. Like he's actually like, it's almost like the punishment's sublime for him, where it's feeling fucking something. And man, his journey is so amazingly heartbreaking.
Yes.
And it's so well done. And when he gets slapped on the face with the reed and his eyes, his head kind of tilts back and he closes his eyes. Man, that was just a beautiful scene.
He doesn't scream. He doesn't cry, at least not in an outburst way. You're right. He almost accepts it in a way that he knows it's coming, but also, like I said, he's not getting anything else anywhere else. This is the only attention he's getting. This is the only kind of contact he's getting. I mean, that's why the relationship with Ellie is so important and so beautiful. We see the scene. I mean, I question sort of the scenes with his father, but he goes and spends some time with his father. The first time he goes, it's this kind of nice father-son moment. It's really wholesome.
Right.
The second time they're playing, they're having fun, right? Oscar seems happy, he's smiling. And then a father's friend comes over and insinuates, hey, let's have a cocktail. And the father sort of doesn't, you see him hesitate, doesn't want to. And then he gives in, and you just watch Oscar's face fall as if he knows this is the rest of the night. Dad's going to crawl in this bottle. These two are just going to sit here and drink and smoke and ignore me. And what's the, I mean, I know you earlier in the conversation you brought up, alcoholic father. And that's what this kid feels, just abandoned everywhere. Mom's always at work, never home enough, never really giving enough attention to Oscar. When Oscar gets in trouble for pushing back against the bullies, he's the one that gets yelled at, gets screamed at. She doesn't even ask him why.
Right.
Like, what happened? What's going on? I don't have kids, but I'd like to think that I'd be like, okay, wait a minute, right? Why would you do this? Or what's going on? Or what happened, right, that made you, that caused you to do this, and why?
Right. Yeah. What did I miss? Right. What I mean, like clearly,
what did I do?
Yeah. Well, You're striking out for some reason. Yeah, all my kids are.
Anyway, sorry.
No. It's just all of that set against the cold, like harsh environment that they're in. It just regardless of what Oscar's life is with Eli, it doesn't matter because it's going to be at least some sort of experience that gives him something back that he has
not there.
Right. And like he's dressed up on the train. There's some sort of, he's, on a nice train. He's in a nice area of the train. It's so heartbreaking.
Godspeed,
all of
kids.
Right. So to the aspects that they took away from the book, which was the pedophilia aspect of it all, I think that's fine. I think that would have distracted, because again, this is Oscar's story. This is, and I understand when you're setting up a novel and you've got to have more backstory to all of these characters, but this is Oscar's story. So telling Eli's backstory doesn't really serve the purpose here in this movie. It's very, very smart. To focus on these. And like you said, to keep everyone else as a somewhat of a distraction. The only time that it really kind of veers back into Ellie's story is when she attacks the lady, and you get what it seems like they almost had to do that for horror aspects, right? Where you get this kind of CGI'd cat scene where she walks into the Catman's apartment and all the cats are hissing. It's almost played a little too over the top. I mean, you can make the argument that it is. And all these cats attack her. The scene where she dies in the hospital when she catches on fire is a brilliant scene. Had they just kept that, I think would have served the movie a little bit better.
We see her struggling anyway. We understand that she's like, I'm done with, I can't do this. Okay.
Yeah, 100% recommend. Did you see the remake or the
No, and I was going to, but then I think so when it first came out, and it's Matt Reeves that directed it, right? The same guy that did the latest Batman
and all the Rise of the not all of them, but the two Planet of the Apes. Remake,
yeah. So I think he's good. I think he's a good filmmaker. But I had no intention. I had no desire really to see this revisited. I think by someone else, especially after watching the Goodnight Mommy remake. I'm like, I'm out. I don't need to. I don't care how well it's done. I mean, that sounded snooty. I'm sorry.
No. You're right though. That's valid. To not want to sully or to like try to, because again, you're only gonna watch in comparison, right? And a
lot of times I don't think that's necessarily fair to the remake.
Sure.
Especially, maybe I'm giving too much credit to remakes, but.
It clearly it wasn't as good. They move up some of the action, so you don't have to watch it. I'll tell you what happens. So the scene where Hawken, and clearly there are all different names in this movie. The scene where Hawken pours acid on his face, it's different, and so you're brought in at the very beginning of Hawken's ambulance ride to the hospital. And then they introduce a cop character that is kind of always lurking and always possibly being some sort of, whereas in Let the Right One In, when Eli's about to be found out, and it's by the guy who's just some schlub.
It's by somebody from the neighborhood. It's by a friend of the woman who Ellie attacked, by a friend of the man that Ellie killed.
Right, and that kind of bonds those, Oscar and Ellie together. In this, it's a police officer, and it's played by the great Elias Koteas. But unfortunately, so they cut out all of the townspeople. So it's really just Hawken, the cop. Everything's kind of encompassed into the cop, and they amplify the CGI and the horror aspects of it a little bit. But what they do by putting that scene at the beginning is immediately introduce the danger. They don't let any of so Oscar's story is completely diminished. Eli's story is completely diminished. Now you're just worried about what's going to happen to these town people. It doesn't give a shit what happens to Hawken. I mean, and how it happens is a little bit different. There's kind of a gratuitous car wreck scene. So from an American audience, it's a little bit more titillating.
Sure.
But it completely misses the point of
it sounds like it cuts out the humanity.
There's actually a Showtime series now called Let the Right One In. Now I watched the first episode just in preparation for this. I watch a lot of shit for this fucking podcast. I hope you guys recognize that. But this... It's really a completely different take. There's a lot of the same elements, but this is and I won't be watching it. It is a guy who
Damien Bashir.
Yes, his daughter is Eleanor. There's no ambiguity there, and they're trying to find a cure for her vampirism. I could give two shits.
I'm not interested.
To this idea of whether they will or they won't, and all of these things, it may be a great show. I don't begrudge anybody liking it, but it's not for me. Recommended if you like.
Yes.
Let's bring it.
Okay. All right. I'll start.
You start.
Yeah? Okay.
Yes.
All right. My first recommended if you like is Thirst, 2009 Park Chan-wook film starring Song Kang-ho, loosely based on, inspired by Emile Zola's Therese Raquin. So you got this weird love story, toxic relationship, vampires, again, coming to terms with sort of who you are, accepting how you do and don't fit into a particular society, and the reason, rightly or wrongly, why. There's my summary.
So mine first is Celia. Mine is Celia by Anne Turner. If you're familiar with this movie, 1981, Australian film about a young girl who is kind of coming into her own in post-World War II Australia, where Australia is dealing with a rabbit infestation and also an infestation of communism. And this young girl who has lost her grandmother and is starting to see things in a fantastical way, but also she's being bullied by her cousin. And she's also dealing with the fact that the Australian government is going to take her bunny away. It sounds silly, but again, the girl's name is Rebecca Smart, one of the best performances by a child probably ever put on film. It is a difficult film to watch. In the sense, it's kind of hard to get a finger on, but by the time that everything that happens in it, and she starts to find her own voice, it's really, really beautiful and really well done.
Okay, my second one is The Others, directed by Alejandro Amenabar. Have you seen his thesis, by the way, his film thesis?
I have not.
You should find it and check it out. It's a good one. It's about snuff films and porn. Anyway, so this is starring Nicole Kidman. It's a ghost story. Nicole Kidman lives in a dark house with her photosensitive kids and becomes convinced that they're being haunted by ghosts. But are they really?
That is a fun movie.
It really is. I think it was his first English language film, right?
Yeah, it was. So my second one is Mean Creek, directed by Jacob Estes, starring Rory Culkin and Josh Peck. Have you seen this movie?
Yeah, it's been, when did that
2004 is when it came out. So this is a small little independent film. Rory Culkin is a bullied slight young boy, and he invites his bully over to his house, and him and his older brothers take him out on a creek ride to exact revenge on him. It's kind of done in a handheld footage type of way, but that's not distracting. And it's not the entirety of the movie, and it's not distracting at all. Great performances by young actors. Really, really well done. Really, really heartbreaking. Highly recommend.
It reminds me a little bit of the Larry Clark film Bully. I mean,
Bully is
a little. I mean, I know
I'm 100%. And this actually, Bully probably would have been one of my RIYL. It doesn't roll off the tongue as the way I would. They recommend it if you like. I really, really like. I really, really like that movie. Bully is a very, very interesting watch.
Yeah,
it's not easy to watch.
I saw that in the theater with like two other people. We weren't together.
Oh, that makes it awkward.
I know. When we all sat like in different parts, and I think we're all like, fucking hell.
Yeah.
It was tough. Of course, I mean, when you go see a film by the director of kids, because it's a film by the director of kids, you kind of know what you're...
So we're going to talk Larry Clark on this podcast at some point.
Yes. Okay, there you go, listeners. Something to look forward to. All right. My next film is Watcher, directed by Chloe Okuno, starring Micah Monroe. Have you seen it? It's so good. Yeah. I love this film. This is 2022. Micah Monroe from It Follows. She plays a young woman named Julia who moves to Bucharest with her husband and starts to think the stranger who watches her from the apartment across the street is the local serial killer targeting women. And she's right. Spoiler. It's so good. Again, another like moody, atmospheric commentary on believing women. So it was so good. And it was a big Sundance hit. Yeah, it's a good one.
So my last one, this may become a thing for me. I'm just going to throw in one that's kind of a wild card. My last one is 1981's Bloody Birthday. This is a schlocky horror film about three kids who were born all on the same day during a lunar or a solar eclipse, meaning that once they were born, something was missing in their psyche. And so as they come of age, they've all three kind of grown up together. They all start to take exact revenge and to wreak havoc on this town. It stars a very, very young Julie Brown. If you remember the MTV VJ Julie Brown, the redhead, not downtown Julie Brown, but the redhead Julie Brown. And it also stars a gentleman named Billy Jane as one of the kids. And he was kind of ubiquitous in the 80s film scene. So he was in Just One of the Guys as like the little brother. He was in The Beastmaster as the young Mark Singer, and he was in Cujo, those types of movies. So
gotcha.
Bloody Birthday. I think it's on Shudder if you have Shudder.
Shudder's great.
Shudder is silly.
Shudder is one of the best streaming services around. And I'm not a huge horror fan, but like I told you, horror is doing so many interesting things that
when it goes
things
across
outside of genres aren't.
It goes across. I mean, really, there's so much stuff that gets lumped in as horror.
Again, like air quotes, horror.
Right.
And that's why I hate, because so many things get lumped into that, I hate these genre titles.
But there's a lot of Italian films on Shudder. There's a lot of Japanese films, Asian films.
Dario Argento.
I have not seen that
I haven't
yet.
either.
I'm hesitant to see it. The latest output of Dario has not been that great. This is
Asia Argento's in it though, so
well,
I liked her best in her work with Olivier Assayas. Anyway, because I'm not pretentious, I promise. Okay. Anyway, next week
we're going to be talking.
We have a special episode.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're going to be talking The Woman King with
our first guest.
With our first guest, Devin Goodman. The Woman King stars Viola Davis, directed by Gina Prince Bythewood. So that will be next week. Other than that, if you're in the DFW area, check out the Fort Worth Film Club's November screenings, upcoming screenings at fortworthfilmclub.com.
Outside of that, we'll see you next time.
All right. Thanks for
guys.
listening. Bye.
You have been listening to Why Does the Wilhelm Scream with your hosts, Brock and Jason. If you liked today's episode, do us a favor and rate, review, and subscribe in whatever application you use to consume podcasts these days. You can reach us by visiting whydoesthewilhelmscream.com. If you are in the DFW area, we would love to see you at a Fort Worth Film Club event. You can learn more about those and find a full schedule at fortworthfilmclub.com. And you can learn about my foundation and how we are trying to foster the next generation of film lovers at realhousefoundation.org. That's REEL housefoundation.org. Till next time,